Hey, millennial leaders. I'm excited. This is the fourth podcast we're at. I hope you're getting great content and this is adding value to your life. I'm excited to bring you the story of Nick Troiano, a millennial leader who's considering a run for Congress. In this podcast, we touch on the importance of great relationships, failing forward, and practicing the skills that you want to actually develop. Practice makes almost perfect. His story will inspire and motivate you. Let's go ahead and jump in.
Welcome to the Millennial Leader Podcast with Carlos Reyes, encouraging and equipping a generation to lead.
Hey, Millennial Leader family. I'm excited today to have Nick Troiano on the show with us. I know you're going to be fascinated and engaged with his story. We have a really cool story of how we got connected, and I'm excited to have Nick on the show with me. Thank you, Nick, for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you, Carlos.
So we've got it's really cool story, millennials, technology, all these interesting ways we get connected. But I reached out to you via Twitter.
That's right.
It's pretty amazing. I'm thankful that you responded back, but it's amazing how we live in this age where we can reach out via things like Twitter. 10 years ago, maybe Facebook? I don't know. I mean, Facebook's not even 10 years old. But I appreciate you responding. Thank you.
Absolutely. I love the idea of profiling millennial leaders. We have so many in our generation, and I think we're well positioned to really change the world.
Absolutely. I have a feeling we've got a lot in common in that respect. I would love for you to just share a little bit about your story and where you are today.
Sure. Well, I'm talking to you from Milford, Pennsylvania, the town in which I grew up. In December, I finished my graduate program at Georgetown University in American Government, where I went to school to study about 6 years ago. And while in Washington, I also got really involved in the sort of nonpartisan political and fiscal reform space. I launched an organization called the Ken Kicks Back in 2012 with some co-founders, and wrapped up my full-time work with that organization also in December. We were focused on engaging and educating young people about the federal budget. And after a long experience realizing the challenges before our generation and today's dysfunctional politics, I decided to come back home, where I'm now exploring a potential independent run for Congress this election cycle.
And you're 24 years old, about to be 25.
That's right.
That's very cool. How did you get involved with this? What made you think, I guess the Can Kicks Back began this idea into politics, but what made you take this in a more serious direction?
Well, I came to the realization some time ago that our country is broke, both politically and financially, and if we don't fix those problems, it's going to be very hard for us to address any of the other major challenges that we face. I also realized that millennials, today's young people, and especially future generations, will disproportionately pay the price if we remain on our current path. And third, I realized that even as young people, we have a significant civic obligation to do something about it. Not just because it's in our own self-interest, but also because, we're citizens of this country too, and you're never too young to be meaningfully involved and help make a difference. So sort of those three ideas came together and inspired me to, even as a student, become very involved in trying to fix our politics. I was part of an organization called American Select in 2012, and to fix our federal budget through efforts like the Can Kicks Back. And after several years of participating and leading those organizations, I realized that millennials also have a significant role to play in electoral politics by seeking and running for public office. And so that's why I wanted to consider undertaking this endeavor. I worked last year on my master's capstone, which was focused on the underrepresentation of young people in our Congress, and that being a significant source of why I think we're not tackling some of the major sustainability challenges facing our country, and also leaving a lot of potential on the table for our generation to help break the political gridlock. So I think we're talking about leadership today, but a core part of leadership is leading by example. I've been talking about the need for young people to start running for office for a while now, and decided, the stars have sort of aligned for me to consider this myself. And my hope is in potentially doing this that I can help inspire many other young people out there to also run for office, whether it's at a local or national level.
So I'm always curious, we're always trying to figure out, how do we take that next step? Did people surround you and say, Nick, hey, you are a natural leader, or you've developed these gifts, we want you to go in this direction? Or did you just always kind of assume leadership? My question comes down to is, how has that been developed in you?
Well, I think being a leader wasn't something I decided one day. I wanted to be a leader. How do I do it? And then read a book about it. I think developing my leadership capacity has come through a desire to accomplish particular things. In high school, it was trying to get an outdoor classroom built. In college, it was trying to get a social innovation public service fund established. After college, it was trying to get millennials some representation on this issue of the federal budget. And these sort of projects and ideas and experiences provided me opportunities to figure out, well, what's the best way to marshal the resources and inspire others to join the cause to accomplish these various things. And I suppose through trial and error, I figured out some ways to be an effective leader of things. And I don't think it's ever a process that you conclude. Certainly I'm still learning how to effectively lead others.
Yeah, one of the things I've mentioned on this podcast many times is, you're right, it is a lifelong learning ambition. And many times we get caught up in college thinking, okay, we graduated, we're done learning. And the reality is there are so many other aspects to life that we need to continually be engaged.
Mm-hmm.
I love this idea of civic entrepreneurship. Can you kind of explain to the millennial leader folks what that means?
Well, I've always tried to describe exactly what it is that I do, since I'm working on always one project or another. And civic entrepreneurship really spoke to me as a description because, to me, it combines two of the most important American traditions, that is both the spirit of enterprise and the spirit of community. So starting something new to marshal resources in order to solve a particular problem for public good. It's about being creative and both simultaneously practical in striving for positive social change. So to me, that was what sort of inspired me to start any of the number of organizations that I've helped get off the ground or lead over the past few years, and take an entrepreneur's mindset to solving some of these problems or reaching some of these goals in both how these organizations operate and in how perhaps they're structured as well.
I think it's cool because I think you use some of the same phraseology in one of the blogs that I have, talking about what is a millennial leader. It's something I sat down to think about for a while, and I'm still not sure if I have it perfectly situated yet. But it's this idea of inspiring social change. I think encompasses a lot of what we're trying to do. And so, very cool. I love it. That's awesome. Can you talk a little bit about growing up? Were your parents natural leaders? Did they influence you? How was all that?
Well, one of the formative experiences that I had growing up was attending a program called Boy State, which the American Legion runs and has been running for almost a century in all 50 states. And it's a civics program. It's a week long where you attend and you sort of form a model government. And throughout the week, you sort of play the role of, county commissioner or judge, or someone in the police force. And you really get a sense of citizenship and civic responsibility. And that's what made me more interested in getting involved in public service and politics, as did the fact that I was involved in my student council since second grade all the way through college. That taught me the value of being a member of a community and the satisfaction that it might bring to sort of leave something better off for those who follow you. And it was those early experiences that I think shaped both my focus and my passion in life. And certainly my parents were there as supportive people in my life to encourage me to pursue what those passions were. And when I went to Boys Nation, each Boys State sends 2 people to Washington every year to form sort of a national government, another week-long civics program called Boys Nation. I connected with other like-minded people from around the country, and it was from there I got involved in an effort called Unity 08, which was the predecessor to American Select in this idea of an online nominating convention for a 3rd presidential ticket. And I met the visionary behind this audacious project. His name was Doug Bailey. And he was one of the first national Republican political consultants and also started one of the first online political publications called The Hotline. And he perhaps was the most influential person in my life because he taught me through example sort of how politics can be used as a means of public service and the role of young people as civic leaders and how technology can be used to improve our democracy. He was a good example of a leader who was a visionary, who was empowering to others, and at his core, being a really decent and good-humored person. So those were some of the experiences that I think shaped me to be sort of who I am and strive to become today.
Yeah, it sounds like he was a strong mentor for you. That's something we like to talk about on Millennial Leader. Do you have any other mentors that you would love to share about that have influenced your thinking, perhaps a politician?
Well, unfortunately, there aren't many role model politicians today. I did happen to intern for Lamar Alexander, who's a current senator, former Secretary of Education, and Governor of Tennessee. And I do admire him a lot because I think he's one of the few statesmen sort of left in politics today. But I've also sort of sought out and gotten to know some people who I admired in the sort of social change space. Another guy's name is Jake Brewer, who works at change.org. You know, I admired what he was doing when he was working at the Sunlight Foundation in D.C. and invited him to work with me on a project. He taught me a lot about sort of how to organize and how organizing was really all about leadership development. When I was the campus director for Americans Elect and built 300 chapters across the country, it wasn't about sort of disseminating orders to these chapters every week about what we were going to do and why. It was really about trying to identify and build local leaders for the campaign who felt ownership over every aspect of the effort as much as I did. So Jake's another guy who sort of impacted my frame of mind when it came to leadership and its importance.
Time and time again, actually, I hear from folks that I interview or some of my mentors how their mentors have definitely influenced them and helped equip them for a lot of things they would do later on down the roads in their careers. So it's something I love to touch on is this idea of mentorship and even having a mentee, because we learn so much from answering some of the basic questions that we haven't answered in years.
Mm-hmm.
Those things that we sometimes can forget how we've dealt with. So thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. I'd love to transition a little bit into millennials because I'm fascinated on what you've seen in terms of their engagement with politics and perhaps how that will look in the future.
Well, the story of millennials in politics is unfortunately a story of disengagement. By greater and greater numbers, millennials are turning away from traditional politics, not because we don't care, but because I think our outlook is pretty rational. Why invest time and energy into something whose outcomes you can't seem to change, whether that's through voting or contacting your member of Congress or attending a rally, for example. So millennials instead have been focusing their energy elsewhere if they want to make a positive difference in the world, whether that's through volunteering or social enterprise. I understand that. That seems rational to me, but I also think it's ultimately self-destructive because traditional politics and governance is the biggest lever that we have to make significant change in our country and in the world. So I think the potential here is developing a way where millennials can re-engage in the political process in a way that they have some sort of greater efficacy through. And I think that's what we're going to see when millennial political engagement begins to express itself outside of our traditional two-party structure. A Pew poll was released this week that showed 50% of millennials now identify as independent. That's the highest it's ever been. We are not confident or trustful of the traditional institutions out there. Now, the question is, can we either create an institution of our own or another way of engaging in the process? And I think we can. And I think that will happen outside of the two-party structure until that both parties, or one of them at least, begins to change the way that it interacts with our generation and interacts with our political process. And I think that can take the form of a group of millennials stepping up to lead, potentially as candidates for public office, and that helping to catalyze a more broad-based movement of millennials who want to get involved and change politics as usual.
Yeah, it's no secret that I think Congress has a favorability of, I don't know, is it 11%, 12%, something like that?
Right.
And I imagine millennials would vote it even lower. I mean, I think that's the broad base of America has no confidence in government. I think one of the really cool things that I saw via your website and some of your information is this idea of a citizen-funded campaign. I'm in Washington, D.C., and so I actually just outside Virginia. And they're always talking about special interests and their involvement in government and, always towing the line that is sometimes pushing politicians in all kinds of directions that may not be best for the American people. I love this idea of the citizen-funded campaign. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the major problems that we face right now is that our political system isn't representative of the people anymore. It's representative of the parties and it's representative of the campaign contributors. So I think the only way we're going to change that is by having candidates run for office in a different way, so that if and when they are elected, they can also start governing in a different way. So that not only means running outside our traditional party structure, that means financing our campaigns without relying on special interest donors. And by that, I mean a lot of these political action committees that are out there who will, donate $5,000 to your campaign and implicitly sort of expect a favor when you're elected. And it's not only sort of the outright corruption, a lot of it is the appearance of corruption, which erodes people's trust and participation in our politics. So we don't need to wait until there's a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, for example, that allowed unlimited corporate spending on an election. And we don't need to wait for a system of federal public financing of elections, although both would be great. We can start leading now by demanding candidates start running their campaigns with only the contributions of individuals. I think that's a sensible first step that won't require a change in laws, but simply require a change in the way of candidates running and who the people decide to support.
Isn't it amazing that that's sort of the place we are today, unfortunately? But I appreciate you're taking strong leadership. I know that millennials are going to begin to wake up to the future. I think they realize how important it is to be, they will realize how important it is to be engaged in our political system. But it takes strong leadership, and so I'm thankful that you're there beginning to engage in these things and have been actually for a while. Can you tell me a little bit about...
Let me just add one thing there. That
Sure.
What we don't need is younger versions of today's politicians and younger versions of the consultants or lobbyists on both sides of the aisle and, campaign folks. We need young people to reimagine the way that we re-engage with our system if we hope to change it. And I think that's something that we can uniquely do because we're young, we have new ideas, we have new energy to bring. And goodness, we have all sorts of new tools to use to network with each other and exercise great influence over our political process. We've seen young people, in more extreme examples, overseas leverage all of these things I just mentioned to, entirely topple governments that weren't working in their national interest. I'm not suggesting we do the same here, but I do think we can take a lesson that if our current political leadership and structure isn't working for us, we can use the processes we already have, set out by our founders, to change it. And the last thing that we need to do is perpetuate it by going into politics the same way as older generations have.
Let's talk about that. Actually, that's interesting. As a leader, we have to be able to project a vision and sometimes be visionary. How have you developed some of these newer ideas to think about things differently? Are you a creative type of leader?
I think it takes a lot of creativity. I mean, the platform that I laid out on my website, the sort of post-partisan platform for generational equity, as I call it, is entirely different than what any other candidate might be running on this cycle, because it's focused on identifying the best ideas from across the spectrum to address our toughest challenges so that the next generation is better off. This is the kind of policy innovation we don't often see in politics, because the current folks involved are risk adverse. Running by the traditional playbook on the traditional platform is the safest way and the surest way to get elected and perhaps to retain your power. Now, I think leadership is about taking risks and not being afraid to fail and being relentless. And through that, at the very least, inspiring others to join your cause. It may not work the first time around, but to me, all of that is worth it, rather than, as I said before, simply perpetuating the status quo, which obviously is not working for us. So young people, I think, are uniquely positioned to take that approach because, honestly, in my position, I have very little to lose. I don't have a long, if I decide to run this year for Congress, I don't have a long congressional career at risk. I don't have a dependent family to worry about, me taking a year to not have a job and do this. So, and I think, I have a familiarity with the new technology to effectively and efficiently get a message out. All of these things are tools and resources that young people ought to take advantage of to really change the system.
Just to ask, do you have a favorite platform, whether it's Twitter or Facebook, or I know some folks have a favorite go-to. Do you have one?
I don't think I have a favorite. I think it's about using a few effectively in the ways that those communities interact with people. I mean, one of the more effective things that we've done so far in this exploratory effort is simply, downloading an email list from my LinkedIn and sending an email saying, hey, I'm thinking about this and I could use your support. And I was able to really jumpstart the effort through that because these are people who you already have relationships with and who want to help see you succeed. So that's an example of how we can use sort of new tools to do on a greater scale things that have always been necessary, which is, maintain and keep relationships with people. Because to be an effective leader and to get things done and to marshal large enough resources, you need to have great relationships with people. And I think we can keep those using all sorts of social media today.
Yeah, relationships are, I think, pivotal in life. Maintaining those, engaging in those, it actually, for me, is part of the thrill of life is people. It's part of why I started this and enjoy this so much. You did mention earlier about successes and failures. We all fail. There are different types of failure. Can you kind of talk about, I imagine you've had some failures in your life and some successes, how they've shaped and molded you as a leader?
Well, I am a fan of the idea of failing forward, of embracing failure for what it can teach you and the lessons that you can take away from it, just as much as successes can. And for me, one experience always sticks out, and that was in January of 2010. I spent a couple months working with folks to stage a rally on Capitol Hill to support a bipartisan proposal for a congressional fiscal commission. And after a long time organizing, we only had about 6 people show up that day. So toward our objective of getting a large amount of young people out, it was a big failure. But we learned that that may not be the way that young people want to get involved, even if they agree with the message. And as I got more involved in fiscal issues, that's a lesson that I took to heart. And it wasn't more than a year and a half later that during the debt ceiling debacle in 2011, I worked with our student body president at Georgetown and many others to instead write a letter and get signatures online from other young leaders, student body presidents from around the country. And within a week or two, we had about 150 student body presidents sign this letter. And when we put it out to the public, it wasn't long before the White House called, and it wasn't long before President Obama was on the line to address the concerns that these 150 leaders raised in our letter. So that was a span within a year and a half of standing outside virtually alone and freezing in front of the Capitol, trying to get our leaders to listen to us,
Right.
to being on a conference call with the President of the United States to bring these issues directly to him. So both experiences were valuable in teaching effective ways to sort of get a message out and make an impact.
Wow, that's actually a very cool story. Thanks for sharing.
Absolutely.
One of the other things that I like to ask people that hop on the podcast with me is this idea of continual development. I think we mentioned earlier that we're continually developing and sharpening and refining sometimes God-given skills and sometimes skills that we develop. Is there anything that you would recommend to the millennial leader family that they can take a look at to further their development?
I think my advice is the best thing you can do to further your development is practice at it. And I don't mean explicitly practice being a leader and being overly deliberative about things that you do, but practice finding your passion and trying to get something done and figuring out what you need to do to accomplish it and how you have to set a vision and get others on board and guide the effort and track and measure your goals. Through this experience, I think you'll begin to refine your own leadership style and qualities, which there isn't a set guide for how to be an effective leader. I mean, maybe some qualities are constant throughout great leaders, but also everyone has their different style. And I think everyone has to find theirs and what they feel most comfortable with and to refine it through practice.
Practice, right? That's actually the first time anybody has shared that, and although there haven't been many podcasts done yet, but I imagine that you'll be unique in that not many people mention that. I'd love to ask you about this idea of passion in leadership, and what role do you believe passion plays in leadership?
Well, passion is the fuel that you put in your tank every day, because being a leader is sometimes very difficult. You face tremendous adversity. Sometimes you also face tremendous criticism. And what I think can get one through that is the underlying passion that you bring to what you do. That is what will be able to motivate you to overcome the various obstacles that you face. And to me, my passion has been trying to engage other millennials in our political process and trying to fix our political process so that we can solve some of the big challenges that we face. And every time that there is a setback or a negative comment or a failure, I have to go back and remember why I'm passionate about what I am. Sometimes that's reading an article that has always made sense to me, or watching a movie, and I sometimes then am able to tap into that passion once again in moments that otherwise I'm overcome by a sense of defeat.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you watch a movie or a documentary, it gets you all fired up and you're ready to conquer the world, and that passion.
It happened to me the other day, because this process of trying to explore running for office, and running for office isn't the most glamorous or easy thing in the world, as you might imagine. And the other day I flicked on a documentary called Patriocracy, which is produced by a guy named Brian Malone and available on Netflix, which just showed how dysfunctional and partisan and polarized our politics have become. And at the end of it, I was raring to go again. Like, this is why I am getting up every day and doing what I'm doing. This is the problem that I'm trying to solve. And it was that extra dose of passion, or just getting back in touch with my passion, that motivated me to overcome the feelings that I had at the time and keep going.
Can I tell you, that's in my queue. That's on my list in Netflix. I haven't gotten to it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I recommend it.
Very cool. Yeah, I sometimes will laugh. One of my buddies or workout friends will send me a video that gets you, all pumped up and motivated. And it's like, it's 1 o'clock though, and I can't go to the gym. If I could just time this passion into what I'm focused on, boy, I feel like I'd get a lot done. Oh, man. So lastly, I like to ask everybody, my guests that come on here, what's an action step that you use or that's worked for you that we can take today to be a better leader? I know you mentioned practice. Is there anything else you would throw in there?
I guess my other piece of advice is find the person who you found to be an effective or inspiring leader in the past and try to understand why that is. What attracted you to that person? Why did you decide to participate? Why would you follow that person even in times of doubt? And through better understanding that, I think you can glean some lessons and values and skills that you perhaps can replicate in your own way.
Thank you, Nick. So how can we support you? How can we find you?
Well, I'm also hoping you're going to ask me for my favorite leadership quote, because I definitely have a favorite one.
Hit me with it.
Well, this one is from Lao Tzu, and he said, "A leader is best when people barely knows he exists. When his work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will say, we did it ourselves." And why I think that this is such an important quote about leadership is because leadership, in its ultimate exercise, is about empowering others to achieve a collective aim. And I think that idea of empowerment should be central to one's conception of leadership. If you can get others to do something that they otherwise might not do by themselves, but that they are prepared to do and willing to do and have the skills to do, that's true leadership. So,
awesome.
To answer your other question of how people might be able to support me in this endeavor of trying to change politics as usual, which no matter where you live, you can be very supportive and helpful to. You can sign up on my website, which is just nicktroiano.com, TROIANO. And there's a petition on there called America Deserves Better that you can sign. And you can also sign up to volunteer or even throw in a few dollars, all of which would be greatly appreciated.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to get on here after and I'm going to sign up. And everybody who's listening, make sure you go check it out, nicktroiano.com, sign the petition. And if you're a millennial with some money, make sure...
Not many of those out there.
Make sure to throw some Nick's way. Nick, I'm so thankful that you responded on Twitter and that you were willing to come on here and chat with me. I want you to know that I'll be following closely. I imagine some people that listening will be following closely, and we'll be supporting you in any way you can, and we'll keep connecting via Twitter and email and go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos.
All right. Talk to you again, brother. Bye.
Yep, take care. Bye.